I'll never forget the moment my 6-year-old daughter Hazel stood up in that courtroom, her tiny voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The judge had just asked her a simple question about living with mommy and daddy, and everyone expected another rehearsed answer. Instead, my little girl, wearing the pink dress with daisies that she'd picked out herself that morning, looked directly at Judge Patricia Thornwell and said something that changed everything. "Your Honor, should I tell you why Daddy really wants us? The thing he said about the money Grandma left in our names?" The entire courtroom froze. I watched Roland's face transform from smug confidence to pure panic in a matter of seconds. His expensive lawyer, Mr. Victor Ashford, started shuffling papers frantically. My own lawyer, Janet Riverside, grabbed my hand under the table, squeezing it tight. We both knew something monumental was about to happen. Roland jumped up from his chair so fast it scraped against the floor with a horrible screech. His face was red, veins bulging in his neck as he screamed at our daughter, "Shut up, don't listen to her. She doesn't know what she's talking about." But Judge Thornwell was already in motion. She slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. "Bailiff, detain him, Mr. Greystone, you will remain silent or be held in contempt of court." Two uniformed bailiffs immediately moved toward Roland, positioning themselves on either side of him. He stood there, fists clenched, breathing hard, looking like a trapped animal. The man who'd spent 6 weeks painting me as an unfit mother who'd walked into court that morning, sure he was going to take my children away, was watching his carefully constructed plan crumble. Judge Thornwell turned back to Hazel, her voice gentle but firm. "Child, please continue. You're safe here. Tell me what you need to say." What Hazel said next didn't just save our family. It exposed a betrayal that ran deeper than I ever imagined, a calculated scheme that had been months in the making. My name is Melinda Greystone, and until that moment in the courtroom, I thought I knew who I'd been married to for 10 years. Roland wasn't just trying to divorce me. He wasn't just trying to take our children because he thought I was a bad mother. He was after something much more sinister, and he'd been planning it since the day my mother Dorothy died 3 months earlier. You see, when someone files for divorce claiming you're an unfit parent, you expect certain things. You expect custody battles, you expect lawyers, you expect accusations and character witnesses. What you don't expect is for your 6-year-old daughter to reveal that your husband has been coaching your children to lie, manipulating them with threats, all to steal their inheritance. That morning had started like any other court day in this nightmare. I'd woken up at 5, too anxious to sleep anyway, made breakfast for Hazel and my 8-year-old son Timothy, even though my stomach was in knots and I couldn't eat a bite myself. I'd braided Hazel's hair the way she liked it, with the purple ribbon she said made her feel brave. Timothy had worn his little suit, the one we'd bought for my mother's funeral, and he'd been so quiet I could barely get him to speak. Roland had arrived at court in his Mercedes, wearing a $3,000 suit, looking every inch the successful real estate developer he wanted everyone to believe he was. He'd brought character witnesses, financial statements, even a child psychologist he'd paid to testify that the children would thrive in a more structured environment. Translation: with him, not with their grieving mother who worked part-time at the local library. For 6 weeks, he'd been building his case methodically. Photos of me crying at the grocery store 2 weeks after Mom died, testimony that I'd seemed distracted and emotional. Even a manipulated story from our neighbor claiming she'd heard the kids crying when I was supposedly home. Each piece of evidence had been carefully curated to paint a picture of a woman falling apart, unable to care for her children, and I'd almost believed it myself. That's what happens when someone you trust turns your grief into a weapon against you. You start to question everything. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe the kids would be better off with someone more stable, more successful, more put together. But then Hazel stood up in that witness chair, her legs swinging because they couldn't reach the floor, and she told the truth that would save us all. The money Grandma had left, the girlfriend named Veronica, the failing business, the months of manipulation and lies, all of it was about to come pouring out of a 6-year-old's mouth. And there was nothing Roland could do to stop it. 3 months after losing my mother Dorothy to cancer, I thought the worst was behind me. The funeral was over, the estate was mostly settled, and I was trying to find a new normal for me and the kids. I was working part-time at the local library, a job I'd always loved because it let me be home when Hazel and Timothy got off the school bus. Our house wasn't fancy, just a 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Street, but it was filled with laughter, homework sessions at the kitchen table, and bedtime stories every single night. Roland and I had been married for 10 years, and while things weren't perfect, I believed we were managing. He'd been distant since Mom's funeral, spending more time at his real estate office, coming home late smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't his usual brand. I'd told myself he was grieving too, that losing Dorothy had affected him differently than it had affected me. After all, she'd been in our lives for a decade, had watched our children grow, had Sunday dinners at our house every week without fail, but I was wrong about what was bothering him. The night he asked for the divorce, I'd been sitting at the kitchen table sorting through Mom's jewelry box, deciding what pieces to save for Hazel when she was older. It was a Thursday, I remember, because Timothy had soccer practice and Hazel had just finished her spelling homework. Roland walked in, loosened his tie, poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and said, "Melinda, this isn't working anymore. I want a divorce." Just like that. No preamble, no explanation, no emotion in his voice at all. He could have been ordering lunch. I'd stared at him, Mom's pearl earrings still clutched in my hand. "What?" "Roland, what are you talking about?" "I've already filed the paperwork," he continued, swirling the scotch in his glass like we were discussing the weather. "My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. I'm asking for full custody of Hazel and Timothy." The pearl earrings slipped from my fingers, bouncing against the hardwood floor with tiny clicking sounds. "Custody? You can't be serious." "Why would you? Because you're not fit to raise them, Melinda. Look at you, you're a mess. You can barely hold yourself together. The kids need stability, structure, a parent who isn't falling apart." I'd wanted to argue, to scream, to throw something, but the words wouldn't come, because part of me wondered if he was right. I had been a mess since Mom died. I'd cried in the cereal aisle at Kroger. I'd forgotten to pack Timothy's lunch twice. I'd let Hazel wear mismatched socks to school because I couldn't find the energy to care about something so trivial when my mother was gone, but I was still their mother. I still read to them every night, still helped with homework, still made sure they felt loved and safe even when I was drowning in my own grief. "You can't take my children," I'd said, my voice barely above a whisper. Roland finished his scotch in one swallow. "Watch me." That was 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks of legal motions and depositions, and watching my children be interviewed by strangers who asked them intrusive questions about whether Mommy seemed sad a lot, whether Daddy's house was nicer, whether they felt safe at home. 8 weeks of Roland playing the concerned father, the successful businessman who could provide a better life, the stable parent who had his act together, and I'd fallen for it. I'd believed this was about the kids, about genuine concern for their well-being. About Roland suddenly becoming Father of the Year after 10 years of working late and missing soccer games and forgetting birthdays. But standing in that courtroom, watching my 6-year-old daughter prepare to speak, I was about to learn the truth. Judge Thornwell leaned forward in her chair, her expression kind but serious. "Take your time, sweetheart. What did your daddy say about the money your grandmother left?" Hazel's small hands gripped the arms of the witness chair. She looked at me, then at her father, then back to the judge. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, braver than any adult I'd ever seen. "Daddy said Grandma Dorothy was stupid to leave money to kids. He said it was his money really, because me and Timothy are too little to have bank accounts. He said once he got," she paused, scrunching up her face trying to remember the exact words, "once he got custody, the money would go to him and he could use it however he wanted." The courtroom erupted. Judge Thornwell slammed her gavel again, calling for order. I felt Janet's hand squeeze mine so tight I thought my fingers might break, but I couldn't feel anything except the roaring in my ears. Roland's lawyer was on his feet, objecting to something, but I couldn't hear the words over the blood pounding through my veins. My mother had left money to the children. I knew that it was in the trust, $50,000 for each of them, to be used for college or released to them when they turned 25, whichever came first. The trust documents explicitly stated that the money was for the children's benefit only, managed by myself and my brother Charles as co-trustees. Roland couldn't touch it. The lawyers had been very clear about that during the estate settlement. But what Roland apparently didn't know, or had chosen to ignore, was that if he had full custody, he could petition to be named trustee instead. He could argue that as the custodial parent, he should have control over the children's assets. It wouldn't give him the money directly, but he could control how it was spent, could make arguments about what constituted the children's benefit. $50,000 per child. $100,000 total. For a man whose real estate business was apparently failing, that was a lot of money. "Order," Judge Thornwell's voice cut through the chaos. "I will have order in my courtroom." She waited until the noise died down, then turned back to Hazel. "Did your father say anything else about this money?" Hazel nodded, her braids bouncing. "He said if we told the judge we wanted to live with him, he'd take us to Disney World. He said Mommy was too sad to take care of us anyway, and that she might go away like Grandma did, so we should pick him." But then he'd get really mad when we asked questions. What kind of questions, honey? Like, Timothy asked why we couldn't just live with mommy and visit daddy like normal divorced kids. And daddy got really angry, he said. Hazel's voice dropped to a whisper and the courtroom went completely silent to hear her. He said that wasn't the plan, that he needed us full-time or the money wouldn't work. I heard Roland make a choking sound behind me. When I turned to look at him, his face had gone from red to a sickly gray color. Mr. Ashford was frantically whispering in his ear, probably telling him to keep quiet, but Roland looked like he might be sick right there in the courtroom. Judge Thornwell's expression had hardened into something I'd never seen before. Mr. Greystone, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you tell your children that you were pursuing custody in order to gain access to their inheritance? Mr. Ashford stood up quickly. Your Honor, I need to confer with my client. This line of questioning, sit down, counselor, the judge said coldly. I asked Mr. Greystone a question and I expect an answer. Sir, did you tell your minor children that you wanted custody in order to access funds left to them by their grandmother? The seconds ticked by. I could hear the clock on the wall, each tick impossibly loud in the silent courtroom. Roland's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Finally, he managed to speak. Your Honor, that's not, the child doesn't understand. I never said yes or no, Mr. Greystone, it's not that simple. Judge Thornwell stood up from her bench, and I'd never seen a person look more furious while remaining completely composed. Bailiff, I want Mr. Greystone detained for questioning. Ms. Riverside, I'm ordering an immediate investigation into these allegations. Mr. Ashford, I suggest you find your client a criminal attorney, because if even half of what this child is saying is true, he's going to need one. Everything happened very fast after that. The bailiffs moved in on Roland, who was shouting something about misunderstandings and his daughter being confused. Mr. Ashford was gathering his papers, his face pale. Janet was pulling out her phone, already making calls. And through it all, Hazel sat in that witness chair, legs still swinging, watching her father being led away, but she wasn't done talking. Your Honor, her small voice cut through the chaos again. There's one more thing. The judge, who'd been conferring with her clerk, turned back to Hazel. Yes, sweetheart, Daddy has a girlfriend named Veronica. She helped him make the plan. And just like that, another bomb dropped. The revelation about Veronica sent the courtroom into chaos again. Judge Thornwell called for a recess, and suddenly I was being ushered into a private conference room with Janet, while bailiffs kept Roland in a separate area under watch. Through the small window in the door, I could see Timothy being brought in by a court advocate. My son looked terrified, his little suit rumpled, his eyes red from crying. Janet sat me down and grabbed both my hands. Melinda, listen to me, this changes everything. Do you know who Veronica is? I shook my head, feeling numb. I've never heard Roland mention anyone by that name. The judge is going to want to question Timothy separately. Are you okay with that? Was I okay with my 8-year-old son being questioned about his father's schemes? No, but did I have a choice? Also no. Whatever he needs to do, I said. I just want the truth out there. 20 minutes later, we were back in the courtroom. Timothy sat in the same witness chair where Hazel had dropped her bombshells, looking even smaller than his sister had. Judge Thornwell's voice was gentle with him, but her questions were pointed. Timothy, your sister mentioned a woman named Veronica. Do you know who she is? Timothy nodded miserably. She's Dad's friend. She comes to his apartment sometimes when we do weekend visits. Did she ever talk to you about the custody case? My son's voice was barely audible. She said Mom was sick in the head from Grandma dying. She said we'd be better off living with Dad full-time, that he could give us a better life. She showed us pictures of this big house with a pool that Dad was gonna buy once everything was settled. Judge Thornwell glanced at some papers in front of her. Timothy, I need you to think carefully. Did Veronica or your father ever specifically mention your grandmother's trust fund? Timothy's face crumpled and tears started streaming down his cheeks. I wasn't supposed to say anything. Dad said if I told, Mom would get in trouble and we'd never see her again, but Hazel's right, he did talk about the money. He said Grandma should have left it to him, not us, because we're just kids and don't know what to do with money. He said once he had custody, he could manage our assets and use the money to invest in his business. He said it was basically the same thing as it being his money. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This wasn't just about greed. Roland had been manipulating our children, terrorizing them with threats about losing me, all to get his hands on money that wasn't his. Janet was furiously taking notes. Across the aisle, Mr. Ashford looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. And through the window, I could see Roland in the hallway with the bailiffs, pacing like a caged animal. One more question, Timothy, the judge said softly. The big house with the pool that Veronica showed you pictures of, did she say when your dad was planning to buy it? She said as soon as the divorce was final and he got us full-time. She was excited about it. She kept saying we'd all be a family, me and Hazel and her and Dad. She said she was gonna be our new mom. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so ugly I could barely stand to look at it. Roland hadn't just wanted the children for their money, he'd been planning a whole new life. A life with Veronica, funded by my mother's legacy to my children, built on lies and manipulation. Judge Thornwell excused Timothy and called both attorneys to the bench. The conversation was heated and whispered, but I caught phrases: fraud, custodial interference, perjury, criminal investigation, when they returned to their seats. The judge addressed the courtroom. I am issuing an emergency order. Mrs. Greystone retains full physical and legal custody of both minor children effective immediately. Mr. Greystone's visitation is suspended pending a full investigation into these allegations. I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges, including attempted fraud and child endangerment through psychological manipulation. Roland burst through the courtroom doors at that moment, having apparently broken away from the bailiffs. You can't do this, those are my kids, this is all lies, Melinda put them up to this. 4 bailiffs converged on him. Judge Thornwell's gavel came down like thunder. Mr. Greystone, you are now in contempt of court. Bailiff, take him into custody. 30 days in county jail, and he's lucky I'm not making it longer. The last thing I saw before they dragged Roland out was his face, twisted with rage and disbelief. The mask of the successful businessman finally stripped away to reveal the desperate, greedy man beneath. The aftermath took months to fully unfold. The DA's office did investigate, and what they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Veronica turned out to be Veronica Hastings, a woman Roland had met at a real estate conference in Atlanta 8 months earlier. She worked in financial consulting, which apparently meant she helped people find creative ways to access money they shouldn't have. She'd been the one to plant the idea in Roland's head about the trust fund, had helped him research the legal loopholes, had even drafted the initial custody petition that made me look unstable. Roland's business was in shambles. He was 3 months behind on his office lease, had defaulted on 2 major development loans, and was facing a lawsuit from investors who claimed he'd misappropriated funds. The Mercedes was leased, the expensive suits were bought on credit cards that were maxed out, and the apartment he'd rented to establish separate residency was costing him $4,000 a month he didn't have. He'd been drowning, and when my mother died and left money to the kids, he'd seen a life raft. The criminal charges came down hard. Attempted fraud, child endangerment, perjury, he'd lied under oath multiple times during depositions, and custodial interference. Veronica was charged as an accessory. Roland's lawyer, Mr. Ashford, claimed he'd had no knowledge of his client's true intentions, and an ethics investigation cleared him, though his reputation took a hit. The custody battle evaporated. Roland's parental rights weren't terminated, but his visitation became supervised only, 2 hours every other Saturday at a court-approved facility, contingent on him completing parenting classes and therapy. He rarely showed up. Eventually, he took a plea deal, 3 years in state prison for the fraud-related charges with the other charges dropped. Veronica got 18 months. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she turned on Roland completely during the investigation, giving prosecutors everything they needed in exchange for a lighter sentence. The divorce was finalized while Roland was serving his sentence. I got the house, primary custody, and child support payments that would start when he was released and found employment, though I wasn't holding my breath on ever seeing that money. The day the divorce was final, I took Hazel and Timothy to visit my mother's grave. It was a sunny Saturday in June, almost a year to the day since she'd passed. We brought flowers, daisies for Hazel because they matched her favorite dress, and sunflowers for Timothy because they were big and brave like he'd been. We sat on the grass by her headstone, and I told them the truth about everything that had happened. They were old enough to understand, old enough to deserve honesty. Is Daddy a bad person? Timothy asked, tracing his finger over the letters of his grandmother's name. I thought about that question for a long time before answering. Daddy made really bad choices, I finally said. He let money become more important than the people he was supposed to love. That doesn't make him all bad, he's still your father, but it means he lost his way. Are we still gonna see him? Hazel asked quietly. If you want to. But only when it's safe and only as much as you're comfortable with. They both nodded, processing this. Then Hazel said something that made my heart swell. Mommy, you're not sad like Daddy said. You were just missing Grandma, that's different. You're right, baby, that's very different. Timothy leaned against my shoulder. Grandma would be proud of Hazel. For telling the truth, Grandma would be proud of both of you, I corrected. You were both so brave. We sat there until the sun started to set, talking about memories of Dorothy, about the future, about everything and nothing. And for the first time since she died, I felt like maybe we were going to be okay. 2 years later, things had settled into a new normal. I'd taken a full-time position at the library as the children's programming coordinator, a job that paid better and came with benefits. The house on Maple Street had gotten a fresh coat of paint. Timothy was 10 and on the honor roll. Hazel was 8 and taking dance classes that she loved. Roland was out of prison, living in a one-bedroom apartment in the next county over, working as a property manager for someone else's real estate company. He saw the kids twice a month now, unsupervised visits that he actually showed up for about 75% of the time. He'd never apologized, not really, but there was something diminished about him, like the prison time and the collapse of his schemes had hollowed him out. The kids were in therapy, working through the psychological damage of having been manipulated by their own father, Dr. Sarah Chen was wonderful with them, helping them understand that they weren't responsible for adult problems, that telling the truth was the right choice even when it was hard. The trust fund money stayed exactly where my mother had intended it, in secure accounts for Hazel and Timothy's future. My brother Charles and I managed it carefully, investing it conservatively, making sure it would be there when they needed it for college or their first homes or whatever dreams they chose to pursue. I dated occasionally, nothing serious, mostly just remembering what it felt like to have adult conversations that didn't revolve around custody schedules and court dates. There was a nice man named David who worked at the county courthouse. Ironically, we'd met in the hallway during one of Roland's hearings, and we'd been seeing each other for a few months. He was patient and kind and understood that my kids came first always. The most unexpected development came from Hazel. She'd started writing stories, long, elaborate tales about brave princesses who saved themselves, about kids who solved mysteries, about families that stuck together through hard times. Her second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had encouraged her to enter a young writers competition, and she'd won 3rd place in the statewide contest. At the awards ceremony, watching my little girl stand on that stage clutching her certificate, I thought about that day in the courtroom, about her tiny voice cutting through the lies, about her courage changing all of our lives. After the ceremony, I knelt down to her level. I'm so proud of you, baby. For this award for your writing for everything. She hugged me tight, then pulled back and looked at me with those serious eyes that sometimes seemed too old for her face. Mommy, can I ask you something? Anything. That day in court when I told the judge about Daddy and the money, did I do the right thing? My heart broke a little. 2 years later, and she was still carrying that weight. Hazel Marie Greystone, I said firmly, you did the bravest, rightest thing anyone could have done. You told the truth when it was scary and hard, and you saved our family, don't you ever doubt that? Okay, she said softly. Then with a small smile, Grandma Dorothy would have wanted me to tell the truth, right? Absolutely. Grandma Dorothy always said the truth might hurt for a minute, but lies hurt forever. Hazel nodded, satisfied, and ran off to show Timothy her award. 5 years after that day in court, I was sitting on the front porch of our house on Maple Street, watching Hazel and Timothy play basketball in the driveway with David's 2 kids from his first marriage. We'd gotten married 6 months earlier, a small ceremony in my mother's favorite garden with just close friends and family. Roland had actually showed up to the wedding, standing awkwardly in the back. He'd even brought a gift, a card with a check for $50 made out to both kids, which was probably all he could afford. The kids had hugged him briefly, politely, the way you'd hug a distant relative you barely knew. That's what he'd become to them, someone who existed on the periphery of their lives, no longer central, no longer able to hurt them. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Charles. Mom's trust fund just hit 6 figures for each kid with the investments. She'd be so happy. I smiled, thinking about Dorothy. She died never knowing about Roland's betrayal, never knowing how her final gift to her grandchildren would become both a target and a salvation. But somehow I thought she'd have been proud of how it all turned out. The money she'd left wasn't just financial security, it had been the catalyst for truth, for justice. For our whole family breaking free from someone who'd seen us as nothing more than assets to exploit. Mom, Hazel called from the driveway. Come play. I set down my phone and joined them, watching the sun set behind our little house, listening to the sound of children's laughter. feeling David's hand squeeze mine as he walked past to grab the ball. This was it. This was the life Roland had tried to steal from us, and this was the life we'd fought to keep. The next morning, I'd wake up and go to work at the library, where I'd help kids find books and stories that transported them to other worlds. Timothy would ace his algebra test. Hazel would come home excited about her creative writing assignment. David would make his terrible spaghetti for dinner, and we'd all pretend it was delicious. Normal, beautiful hours. And somewhere in a secured account that wouldn't be touched until they were ready, my children's inheritance sat waiting, not for someone to exploit it, but for them to use it to build their own dreams, their own futures, their own stories. All because one brave 6-year-old girl had stood up in a courtroom and told the truth.